The low thrum from the speakers felt as if it traveled straight through the soles of my feet as I stepped past the thick velvet curtain and into the main room of the Inferno bar. I had no business being here. An architect who specializes in restoring historic homes doesn't normally find herself in East Side, Boston, at 11 o'clock on a weeknight. But my client had been insistent. Mr. Abrams wanted his new restaurant to carry the essence of Inferno, and according to him, the only way to understand that spirit was to experience it firsthand. I had heard people talk about Inferno, their whispers laced with warning. Inferno belonged to Ethan Varela, a name that made contractors suddenly have scheduling conflicts and turned city inspectors mysteriously flexible. But standing here, surrounded by exposed brick walls restored with astonishing precision and industrial lighting that felt both classic and quietly modern, I began to understand why this place held such gravity. Whoever designed this space understood structure, the skeleton of a building, the way old constructions breathe through each layer of brick and worn wooden beam. I adjusted my shoulder bag, meaning to take a few photos of the ceiling, but in my clumsiness I dropped the bag. Papers scattered across the glossy concrete floor like autumn leaves. I knelt, heat rising up my neck, scrambling to gather blueprints, client notes, and the scraps of paper I'd shoved in throughout the day. "Do you need help?" A man's voice floated above me, gentle but tinged with amusement. I looked up to see a server dressed in black, his eyes bright with quiet curiosity. The name tag pinned to his shirt read, "Marco." "I'm fine. Thank you," I muttered, stuffing papers into the bag faster than necessary. The music shifted, a slow ballad unfurling through the room, thickening the air, turning gold beneath the dim lights. When I got to my feet, clutching my bag to my chest, Marco had already turned to serve a nearby table. A group of men in expensive suits sat drinking whiskey. One of them lifted his gaze as Marco approached, and even from a distance, I felt the weight of his attention. Dark hair slicked back, a sharply carved face like something sculpted from marble, eyes so deep they caught the light like polished obsidian. His black shirt was rolled at the sleeves, revealing forearms that weren't the soft, cultivated muscles of a gym, but the strength of someone who had worked with his hands. A thin scar ran from his left brow to his temple, the mark of something old and dangerous. Ethan Varela. It had to be him. I turned away quickly, cheeks warming. I wasn't here to gawk at the owner like some starry-eyed teenager. I was here for research for the ceiling, the lighting, the structure, absolutely not for him. I walked to the bar and ordered a bottle of sparkling water. The bartender glanced at me with mild surprise but said nothing. For the next half hour, I tried to focus on architectural details, typing notes about the exposed ventilation ducts and the way they preserved the original window frames of this old factory building. But my eyes kept drifting back to that corner table, to the man named Ethan, who didn't need to speak to command the entire room. When I finally left Inferno and stepped into the cold wind of an October night, I realized I had been holding my breath the entire time I was inside. The outside air felt like an antidote. I walked 3 blocks to where my aging Civic was parked, my mind already arranging the points I would present to Mr. Abrams in the morning. Only when I arrived at my small house in Jamaica Plain, the one I'd bought 6 months ago, did I realize something was wrong. I emptied my entire bag onto the kitchen table, blueprints, contracts, notebooks, even the Thai menu I kept meaning to try. But the yellow slip of paper, the one with my home address written on it, wasn't there. The note I had lazily stuck to the outside of a document packet rather than entering the address into my GPS. My heart dipped. It must have fallen at Inferno, probably during that chaotic moment when I dropped everything. I pulled out my phone, went to the bar's website, and found the contact number. I pressed call, a vague unease rising in my chest for reasons I couldn't name. "Inferno." A male voice answered, clipped, professional. I was there about an hour ago and I think I dropped a piece of paper. A yellow sticky note. I know it's a weird request, but... Hold on. The voice cut me off. Footsteps, faint music, then silence. My heartbeat grew louder in that quiet. What was written on the paper? Another voice asked, deeper, taut with something beneath the surface, as if this wasn't small talk but something that mattered. Just my home address. I wrote it this morning. It probably fell when I dropped my papers. Your name? Claire Whitman. A long silence stretched out, making my palms damp. I found it, Ms. Whitman. You can come pick it up tomorrow evening after 6. Ask for me at the door. Who are you? Ethan Varela. The call ended before I could respond. I stood frozen in my kitchen, phone still pressed to my ear, my mind trying to make sense of why the sound of his voice sent a shiver through me. It was just a sticky note, just an address. And yet, there had been something in the way he asked for my name, as if it meant something. As if the words Whitaker Lane had stirred up something he didn't expect. I sank into the kitchen chair, my hand still gripping the phone long after the call had ended. The house was so quiet, the ticking of the wall clock sounded unnervingly sharp, mingling with the faint whisper of wind slipping through the window frame I still hadn't gotten around to fixing. I glanced around the kitchen, everything exactly as it had been when I moved in 6 months ago. The exposed brick wall, the old wooden shelves I had polished myself, the rusted iron ceiling lamp I found at a flea market. I had loved this house from the first moment I saw it, loved the way time clung to it, loved how every detail seemed to murmur stories from another era. But now, after hearing my name spoken by a man like Ethan Varela, in a voice that seemed to lay a thin veil of threat across the air, the house suddenly felt strange. I stood and returned to the bag I had emptied onto the table, checking everything once again. The slip of paper was still missing. It was just a yellow, sticky note. My home address written in a hurry that morning because I had rushed out the door without saving it into my phone. I'd stuck it to the outside of Mr. Abrams's project file, planning to enter it later. When I dropped my papers at the bar, I'd scrambled to gather everything, but thinking back, the note could have slipped free and disappeared. Someone might have picked it up. Maybe Ethan himself had found it, read the address, and recognized something that made him freeze for a moment. I tried to push away the unease spreading through my chest, telling myself I was imagining too much. But then his eyes flashed in my mind again. That sharp, fleeting look that made me feel as if I'd been seen down to my bones. I opened my laptop and searched for anything I could find about Ethan Varela. There wasn't much. Mostly vague articles about the upscale bar chain he owned, a few polished PR interviews, and a background that was far too clean to be real. But on a few real estate forums, I found scattered comments mentioning how his company often bought dilapidated buildings at low prices and converted them into luxury entertainment spaces. One anonymous thread hinted at a strange acquisition in Southie tied to Ethan, though no details were known. I closed the laptop, my heart pounding. The house around me felt different now, as if it were holding a secret I wasn't ready to uncover. I walked upstairs, down the narrow oak-lined hallway I'd polished by hand, and stepped into the bedroom. Everything was tidy, peaceful as usual, but when I shut the door, the soft creak of the hinge made me flinch. I wandered the house again, checking every window and lock even though I knew I had secured them earlier. I pulled the curtains, turned off the lights, and lay down. But my eyes stayed wide open in the dark. Every small sound, the wind slipping through the frame, the soft groan of old wood, the rustle of leaves brushing against the siding felt amplified. I wondered whether someone might be watching me. And more troubling still, why would a man like Ethan Varela react so strongly to a simple slip of paper with my address? I closed my eyes, but sleep never came. In the darkness, I kept seeing his face from last night, the way he'd looked across the room. It wasn't the gaze of a bar owner. It was the gaze of someone who had lost something, something that mattered. What was it about my house, about the name Whitaker Lane, that had awakened a memory powerful enough to pull him toward it? If you're still listening and something in this story is touching a part of your own heart, take a moment to subscribe to our channel, like and share this video so we can keep bringing you more heartfelt stories every day. And if you don't mind, would you tell me where you're watching from? Leave a comment below and let us know which corner of the world this story has reached. We truly treasure every word you share. By morning, I woke with the disorienting sense that I had never truly slept. My body felt heavy, my mind soaked in fog. I brewed coffee, splashed cold water on my face, and tried to anchor myself in reality in the crowded schedule ahead, the unfinished designs, and a morning meeting with Mr. Abrams at 9. But throughout the meeting, my focus drifted. Every time my eyes swept across the drawings, my thoughts slipped back to the night before, to that brief phone call, to the certainty in Ethan's voice when he said my name as though he had known it long before I spoke it. I didn't mention any of this to Mr. Abrams. I forced a smile when he said I looked tired and blamed it on working late. But when I left his office, I didn't go home. I drove aimlessly through familiar neighborhoods, only to realize I had stopped in front of Inferno without knowing how I'd ended up there. I sat in my car, staring at the small bronze sign mounted on the building's side. It was an unassuming place by daylight, yet it was always full once night fell. It was just shy of 11 in the morning. The bar wasn't open yet. I had no intention of going inside, didn't even know what I was waiting for, only that something felt unfinished, like a puzzle with one missing piece. I returned home near noon, ate half a sandwich, and tried to bury myself in work. But every thought circled back to the missing note, to Ethan's eyes, to that stretched silence before he spoke my name. By 6 that evening, I stood in front of the mirror, smoothing my hair, slipping into a fitted black sweater, and pulling on a sand-colored trench coat. I told myself this wasn't a meeting. I was simply retrieving a piece of paper. Nothing more. I arrived at Inferno on the dot. The guard at the door scanned me with a cautious eye, but when I said I was there to see Ethan Varela, he merely nodded and opened the door, no questions asked. Inside, the same honey-thick lighting draped itself over the room, soft music humming through the ground floor. I barely had time to look around before an older man approached. His eyes were sharp and cold, as if he had been watching me long before I stepped inside. "Ms. Whitman," he said, without needing to ask my name. I nodded. He motioned for me to follow him, leading me down a narrow hallway, up a dark wooden staircase, and stopping before a closed door. He knocked twice, then opened it without waiting for a response. "Come in." The voice from inside was low and steady, unmistakable. Ethan Varela stood behind a large walnut desk, the light spilling in from the window behind him, casting his shoulders in shadow. He wore a white shirt, no tie, sleeves rolled up. In an instant, he was both the man I had seen the night before and somehow entirely different. No longer watching from afar with guarded eyes. Now he was looking directly at me, nothing hidden. "Please sit," he said, gesturing to the leather chair across from him. I sat, my heart beating fast, though I couldn't say whether from fear or something else. He slid something toward me, the yellow sticky note, my handwriting jagged across the surface, 79 Whitaker Lane. I exhaled. "Thank you. I didn't think it was that important. Just a piece of paper." But when I looked up, Ethan's gaze hadn't softened. It was deep and weighted, as though filled with memories. "How long have you lived there?" I blinked. "I'm sorry?" 79. "Whitaker," he repeated. "How long have you been there?" 6 months. I bought it at a foreclosure auction. It was much cheaper than other properties in the area. Why? He didn't answer right away. He simply looked at me for a long time before speaking, each word sounding as if it had to push past something lodged in his throat. 10 years ago, my sister disappeared. And the last place she was seen was that house. The air in the room thickened instantly, as though his words had frozen the light itself. I sat frozen as the outside sounds, clinking glasses, muted music faded into a distant hum. Ethan didn't look away from me. He stood, walked to a wooden cabinet beside the desk, pulled open the bottom drawer and took out an aging, yellowed envelope. When he opened it, I noticed his hand tremble. He drew out a photograph and placed it in front of me. A young woman, shoulder-length dark brown hair, bright eyes shimmering with laughter. She stood in front of a house with a sloped roof and arched windows I recognized instantly. My house. Her name was Sadie, Ethan said quietly. Sadie Varela. She was my sister. She was 19 when she disappeared, a sophomore in the art program at BU. That day, she said she was stopping by Whitaker Lane to meet a friend about some art project. She never came home. I stared at the photo again. Sadie's smile held a warmth so alive it tightened something in my throat. I didn't know what to say. Offering condolences felt hollow. Asking questions felt cruel. I looked at Ethan instead, hoping my eyes showed that I was listening, truly listening. The police investigated for 8 months, he continued, still staring at the photo. They searched the area, questioned neighbors, classmates, even old teachers. Nothing. No body. No clear lead. And then they gave up. They labeled it a no-trace disappearance and closed the case. But I didn't. He lifted his eyes to mine. I know my sister. I know she wouldn't just vanish. I know something happened to her in that house. I drew in a long breath, my lungs feeling too tight. 6 months ago, I had walked into that house simply looking for a place to build a new life. I saw the high ceilings, the antique molding, the worn floorboards, and all I saw was potential. I didn't know that the place I now called home had once been linked to such loss. Who owned the house before me? I whispered, hardly recognizing my own voice. A man named Victor Talbot, he said. He died 3 years ago from a stroke. Owned the house for nearly a decade. Had suspicious ties to a few old real estate players. Involved in questionable deals, but nothing ever stuck. He was rumored to have connections to the Russo family, one of the old syndicates in Boston. Ethan paused before adding, and he was the one Sadie was supposed to meet that day. I leaned back, feeling the strength drain from my body. Suddenly the house I had cherished, the one whose walls I painted, whose floors I restored, seemed to transform into a silent stage where a tragedy had once unfolded and then been buried. Claire, I don't think you're involved in any of this, Ethan said, his voice softer now. I know you're just the new owner, but you live there. You may have seen something. Or maybe, in those walls, something is still waiting to be found. I looked at him again. In that moment, his eyes were no longer those of a businessman. They were the eyes of a brother who had never been given answers, a man carrying a grief that refused to fade. I swallowed hard, feeling something shift inside me. I wasn't sure I could help him. But if there was anything I could do to help him find the truth, I would. Ethan nodded, a faint softness passing through his expression, though a cold, unyielding determination still flickered beneath it. Thank you, he said. And if you're willing, I want to go to the house, to see every corner again. Maybe this time I'll notice what I missed 10 years ago. I didn't answer right away. Ethan's words still hung in the air like a cold stone dropped onto a perfectly still lake. Ring after ring rippled through my mind, pushing aside logic and pulling me into a state I couldn't quite name. He wanted to enter my house, the house I had painstakingly restored, touching every brick and every door with my own hands. That house might now be part of something far darker than I ever imagined. I rose and walked toward the window. The streetlights outside cutting through the frosted glass and stretching long streaks of light across the wooden floor. I crossed my arms, trying to keep my voice steady. "Do you think I'm stupid? Or just easily manipulated?" Ethan didn't react. He just sat there, silent as a breathing stone. I turned back to him. "I'm not saying I don't believe you. What you said about your sister, the way you told it, the look in your eyes when you placed that photo on the desk, none of it felt false. But the truth doesn't mean I'm ready to throw open the doors of my home to a man I barely know, especially when that man is Ethan Varela." That name had drifted through whispered rumors for years among architects, in real estate circles, and in places I never wanted to be involved with. I had heard enough to know exactly who I was standing in front of. But what scared me more wasn't him. It was the fact that I was beginning to believe him, and I wasn't sure I was ready for where that belief might lead. Ethan didn't move. His voice, when it came, was low and clear, like a line of jazz dropped into the stillness of the room. "I don't need you to trust me right away. I just need a chance. I've been searching for answers for 10 years. I know how to observe, and I know when someone is hiding something. And when I saw the way you looked at Sadie's photo, I knew you weren't lying. I don't think you're involved. But you might be the doorway to the part of the truth I haven't been able to reach." My hands tightened. "I'm not a cop. I'm not an investigator. I'm an architect, the only one in my family who works in the arts. Someone who survives by restoring the past of others. I came to Boston to start over, to escape the old shadows that clung to me for far too long. And now, because of one slip of paper with my address on it, I was being pulled into the past of a stranger." I took a deep breath, my eyes dropping to my hands. If I refused, would it end here? Or would Ethan find another way? And if I agreed, what would be waiting for me inside my own walls? Maybe nothing. Or maybe a truth I had no desire to uncover. I turned back to him, meeting his gaze fully. "I'll agree, but with conditions. I'll be present the entire time you examine the house. You and your people don't touch or break anything without my consent. And if I feel anything is going too far, I stop it. Immediately." Ethan nodded without hesitation. "Agreed." I looked at him one last time before leaving the office. My heart tangled somewhere between caution and something dangerously close to compassion. When I closed the door behind me, I wasn't entirely sure what had made me say yes. Maybe it was the look in his eyes when he spoke of Sadie. Maybe it was the way the house had begun to make sounds I couldn't explain. Or maybe it was the intuition of someone who had lived in darkness long enough to recognize when a thin thread of light begins to slip in. The next morning, just as I had finished preparing some drawings for Mr. Abrams's project, the doorbell rang. I opened it to find Ethan standing there with 3 other men, 2 stern-faced, one younger with quick eyes, all dressed simply but neatly, with the poised confidence of people accustomed to work requiring care and precision. Ethan offered a faint smile and said they would begin examining the house, especially the basement where he believed important clues might be hidden. I let them in, my heart tight and jittery, trying to steady myself under the quiet authority Ethan carried so effortlessly. He moved through the rooms lightly but with purpose, his eyes sweeping over every corner. We walked through the living room, the hallway, up the wooden stairs. Each step felt heavier, the air thickening, as if the house itself were bracing to reveal its secrets. Ethan paused in the center of the room, his focus shifting toward the basement door. He directed his team with quiet efficiency. When the basement door creaked open, I drew a deep breath, a blend of fear and curiosity twisting inside me. We descended the old concrete steps, the smell of dampness and aged wood rising to meet us, a scent that belonged to decades of silence. Ethan switched on a flashlight, sweeping its beam across the brick walls, wooden beams and narrow recesses I had never noticed before. He motioned for one of the men, Tomas, to inspect the walls, while Julian, the younger one, measured and logged everything onto a tablet. The third man moved carefully around the shelves and corners, each gesture precise and alert. I stood back, watching. Dread and anticipation knotted in my stomach. Every small sound, the fall of a pebble, the scrape of a hand against brick, made my pulse quicken. Ethan stopped in front of an old wall near the fireplace, his attention fixed on a small crack I had never seen. He nodded at Frank, the larger man, signaling him to take out his tools and begin tapping lightly, testing for inconsistencies. The room fell into such concentrated silence I could hear my own breathing. After a moment, Frank used a small hammer and chisel to carefully remove a section of plaster. Dust rose gently in the flashlight's glow. Ethan leaned in, muscles tightening, eyes locked on the opening. My heart slammed hard against my ribs as I stared at the hollow space revealed behind the wall. It was deeper and darker than I ever imagined. Julian angled his tablet, taking notes, while Tomas frowned, his expression grave. Ethan stepped forward, reaching into the space, his hand brushing along the inner wall with the care of someone reading a language only he understood. Something in his energy shifted, protective, searching, relentless. The air tightened around us. I held my breath as Ethan signaled for Frank to continue. Dust drifted around us like pale smoke as more plaster came away, and I realized with a sharp jolt that I had crossed into a world I'd only ever imagined, a world of buried truths, long-held secrets, and dangers that lived beneath ordinary floors. Frank removed more of the old plaster, dust swirling in the dim light, and I pressed myself against the wall, my heart pounding so loudly it echoed in my ears. Julian leaned closer, documenting everything, while Tomas remained still and vigilant, each of them radiating a practiced seriousness that made my skin prickle. When Frank uncovered a deeper cavity, Ethan immediately shone his light inside. The moment I saw it, a shiver snaked down my spine. A plastic bag, tightly sealed, containing what looked like an old stack of documents and several photographs faded with time. Ethan pulled the bag out carefully and placed it on a makeshift table created from an old door propped on two sawhorses. His hands trembled faintly as he opened it, though his eyes stayed fierce with concentration. Inside were papers covered in slanted handwriting, dark ink, along with several photographs, faces I didn't recognize, captured in tense moments, men signing documents, exchanging items in offices and restaurants. It looked like a secret record of dealings I'd only heard mentioned in rumors. Ethan sifted through each page quickly but meticulously, his jaw tightening when he reached a photo of two men in suits. One clearly Victor Talbot, the house's former owner, and the other I didn't know. Julian documented each page while Tomas hovered near Ethan, listening as if every rustle of paper carried meaning. I stood frozen, clutching my bag, my heartbeat frantic. This wasn't business paperwork or old receipts. It was evidence, dangerous, damning evidence of illegal dealings tied to powerful people in the city and possibly the underground world Ethan had alluded to. Ethan lifted a small leather-bound notebook, opening it to reveal dense handwriting numbers, names, dates, locations, a timeline of events that, in the wrong hands, could ignite a disaster. I held my breath when he pointed to a page listing high-ranking city officials alongside transactions that made my skin tighten. He closed the notebook and handed it to Julian to archive, his eyes turning colder, deeper, as if trying to convey something beyond words. I stepped closer, scanning the photographs, recognizing a few familiar locations around the neighborhood, including my own house. A mix of fear and disbelief washed over me. Ethan turned to me, his voice low but cutting, telling me that everything we had just uncovered wasn't merely old paperwork. It was a chain of secrets buried deliberately, secrets tied directly to his sister, and to whatever had happened on Whitaker Lane 10 years ago. My knees weakened as I sank onto a nearby chair, my hands trembling too much to touch anything. I felt as if I had stepped into another reality, one where the house I once considered a refuge was now the center of something brutal and hidden. Ethan instructed Frank and Julian to go through every photo, every document, leaving nothing unchecked. He said there might be more throughout the house, and we would need to examine every inch. I drew a long breath, struggling to steady myself, but fear continued to crawl through me. From this moment forward, I knew I was entangled in something far larger than myself, something far more dangerous than anything I had ever imagined. And it had all begun with the house I called home, and a harmless yellow sticky note I had dropped in a bar that night. I stepped back, my heart pounding so hard it felt as if the entire basement trembled with it. The documents, photographs, and notebooks spread out before Ethan and his team were no longer just old pieces of paper. They were evidence of a world I had never imagined. A world full of danger and meticulously buried secrets. A wave of dizziness washed over me, followed by a sharp sting of anxiety, even fear, as the magnitude of what Ethan had revealed began to settle in. I couldn't understand how anyone could have hidden an entire network of connections, criminal dealings, disappearances, possibly even deaths inside the folds of these pages. And now, here I was, standing among them, the one person who could confirm the location and origins of these fragments of truth. I took another step back, trying to drown the panic with logic, but my hands still trembled and my thoughts swirled, scattered like leaves in a sudden gust. Ethan turned toward me. His gaze was steady, sharp, and utterly grounded, and in that moment, I realized I couldn't escape this simply by staying silent. "Claire," he said, his voice low and commanding, "I know you're scared. I know you want to walk away. But you've become a crucial part of this. Everything begins with the fact that you live in the house where my sister disappeared, all because you picked up that little yellow note you thought meant nothing. If you walk away now, this information will be lost or destroyed and I'll never know the truth." I lowered my head, drawing in a long, uneven breath, trying to steady myself. But fear kept rising, thick and unrelenting. I wasn't built for this world. I had no skills for it. I was an architect, a woman who restored beauty from the past, who translated history into structure. I came to Boston to start over, to leave the old shadows behind. And now, because of one slip of paper, I was being pulled into the darkest chapter of a stranger's life. Ethan continued, his eyes never leaving mine. He picked up a photograph and placed it gently back in front of me. "Look at this. This isn't a game. This is real. 10 years ago, my sister vanished. And what we just found might be my last chance to understand what happened to her." I stared at the photo, Sadie's bright, carefree smile and the quiet ache in Ethan's voice seemed to radiate through her expression. Something inside my chest tightened. I stayed silent, tense, afraid. I wanted to say no. I wanted to walk away. But something deeper nudged me. Reason, conscience, instinct telling me that if I didn't help him, I would regret it for the rest of my life. Ethan rested his hand on the table, his tone firm but gentler. "Claire, I'm not asking you to do anything reckless. I just need your help confirming the details inside the house, the locations where we found these documents, the areas we need to examine. If we can understand how these pieces fit together, we can understand everything." I inhaled slowly, feeling as if each breath carried its own weight. Every part of the house I once loved now felt sinister. as if every brick and beam contained a hidden fragment of something terrible. I nodded slowly, saying nothing, but Ethan read the answer in my eyes. He gave a brief nod in return, a faint smile passing over his lips, though the seriousness in his eyes remained. "Thank you," he said, and he didn't need any other words. I exhaled shakily, trying to summon calm, trying to tell myself I could handle this. But deep inside, fear threaded through my ribs like cold wire. I knew nothing would be the same again, not my house, not my quiet routines, not the life I'd rebuilt. My home was now the center of a dangerous story, and I had stepped into it with no way back. After Ethan stepped aside to oversee his team as they examined the documents, I returned to my small office space at the back of the basement, my nerves still thrumming. Julian and Tomas kept working cataloging, marking, scanning, but a part of me couldn't stop glancing at the leather-bound notebook Ethan had opened earlier. It pulled at my attention like a warning and a confession intertwined. I told myself to focus, to think clearly, but my mind kept spinning with possibilities, each one darker than the last. Ethan sat down next to me, flipping through the purchase records for Whitaker Lane, his eyes scanning numbers and signatures I'd never paid attention to. "Claire," he said, "I need to know exactly how you bought this house, every call, every file, every document." I sighed, recounting everything step by step. 6 months ago, I'd attended a foreclosure auction held by Northeast Properties. The opening bid was low. I offered slightly more and won. Victor Talbot, the previous owner, had died without a will. The property went through probate and was scheduled for public auction. There was nothing unusual, nothing secret, nothing dangerous I knew of. Ethan leaned forward, still studying the file. He asked about the broker Jennifer Park, the other bidders, the probate process. I told him everything I could remember, every detail suddenly heavy with implication, as though each could be a clue. Ethan nodded, then instructed Julian to cross-check the public records, Jennifer Park's connections to law firms, her past transactions, any irregularities in the company's history. I saw Ethan's eyes sharpen as he absorbed each detail: the closing timeline, the signatures, the shifting property value. Slowly, painfully, the threads began to tie together, forming a pattern I hadn't seen before. A pattern suggesting that my ownership of this house may not have been an accident at all. Ethan's voice deepened. "Claire, everything here needs to be verified carefully. One mistake could destroy the only chance I've had in 10 years to find out what happened to my sister." My heart contracted. The weight of responsibility pressed harder than ever. This wasn't just an inspection anymore. It was an investigation, one that carried danger, consequences, and a truth that had been buried for a decade. Ethan handed me a list of documents to review: emails, contracts, records, everything related to Whitaker Lane and its past transactions. He asked me to confirm and cross-check each detail. I opened my laptop and began organizing the files, lines of text and numbers suddenly heavy with meaning. The mild fluctuations in price, the withdrawal of certain bidders, the timing of signatures, all the small oddities I'd never questioned now formed a puzzle only Ethan's team had the skill to decode. I sat at the desk, eyes locked on the screen, fear and pressure tightening around me. Yet somewhere beneath all of that, something steadier emerged: the sense that I had to do this. Not just for Ethan, but for the truth the house itself had been holding all along. I noted every detail, marking the strange patterns, highlighting anything that might be a clue. Ethan stood nearby, watching me with a level of attention that made it clear, from this moment on, every action I took mattered, and I could no longer walk away. That afternoon, Ethan took me to the small office of Detective Monroe, a man well known in Boston for handling the kind of complicated cases most investigators refused to touch. His office sat on the second floor of an old building, its frosted windows catching the glow of the streetlights. Inside, piles of case files were stacked high, red thread ran across corkboards like spiderwebs, and sketches of diagrams clung to the walls. Monroe was a man in his 60s, with silver hair and eyes as sharp as a blade lines etched across his forehead, carrying the weight of countless unfinished stories. He looked at Ethan and me, giving a small nod before inviting us to sit. Ethan introduced me as Claire Whitman, the architect currently living at Whitaker Lane, the house where his sister disappeared. Monroe's mouth twitched into the slightest smirk, his eyes scanning me quietly, asking no questions but somehow already understanding the gravity of everything. Ethan began recounting everything we had found in my basement, the fragments of paper, the photograph of Sadie, every detail tied to Victor Talbot and the strange property dealings we had uncovered. Monroe listened intently, taking notes with a steady hand, his gaze never still as it flicked between us, the documents, and whatever memories he was matching them to. I described the auction process, the verification steps, every detail Ethan had asked me to review, and I could tell Monroe wasn't only interested in what had happened, he was already mapping it to something larger, something woven into the city's dark machinery. After listening for a while, Monroe frowned, pulled out another file, and opened it to the first page. "There's someone you need to know about," he said. "Someone they call the architect." "Claire, that isn't a nickname. The architect is the person behind multiple real estate projects, someone who controls cash flow, construction deals, legal and illegal operations alike. A man powerful enough to hide crimes most people believe are impossible to cover up." A shiver crawled through me. It was as if I had stepped into a world where urban legends, whispered rumors, and stories of vanished people were all brutally real. Ethan's voice hardened. "I need to know if the architect is connected to Sadie's disappearance." Monroe nodded, flipping the page to reveal photographs and notes tied to Victor Talbot. Snapshots of meetings with influential figures, money transfers disguised under shell companies, everything arranged with such sophistication that without physical evidence, no one would have noticed a thing. I stood beside them, staring at the images, feeling my pulse thudding in my throat, not only curiosity, but fear tightening around it. Monroe continued, "The architect may still be active. He may have stayed in the shadows for years. And anyone who knows where these documents were found, anyone who knows the house where Sadie vanished, is at risk of being discovered and removed." I went still, feeling cold sweep through me. Ethan placed a hand on my shoulder, his expression grave but protective. "We can't stop now. We've found evidence. We've confirmed it. And you're the one who lives in that house, the one person who can verify every position, every detail." Monroe handed Ethan a list of retired investigators, potential witnesses, and public records tied to Talbot's dealings. He explained that the next step was to identify the architect, uncover his motives, and determine how he had managed to operate from the shadows for so long. I looked around Monroe's office, the walls crowded with files and red lines, the air thick with unresolved cases and buried truths, and realized I was standing at the heart of a network of power, crime, and secrets I had never imagined. I swallowed hard, heart racing, but I understood. I couldn't walk away. Ethan looked at me with a seriousness threaded with trust, and I knew that from this moment on I had become an essential part of the search for the architect and the truth behind Sadie Varela's disappearance. A week after the meeting with Detective Monroe, I received news from Julian. They had uncovered a significant connection. Ethan called me to his office, where documents, photos, and files lay carefully arranged across his large desk. He stood there, eyes heavy with tension but sharp with purpose, his hand resting on a thick file. Julian and Tomas stood beside him, watching me as if waiting for me to brace myself. Ethan opened the file, slid a few pages toward me, and spoke in a low, steady voice. "Claire, I want you to take a close look at this name, Harrison Yates." I frowned. I had never heard the name in any public record or news article. Ethan continued. Harrison Yates is believed to be the architect, the man behind every project, every hidden transaction that built the underground network we're trying to unravel. My pulse quickened, my body tightening like a drawn wire, my thoughts struggling to keep pace. Harrison Yates, Ethan said, was once a major player in Boston's real estate world, a man with deep connections to law firms, city officials, and even members of the criminal circles operating beneath the surface. Julian pointed out notes in the file signatures, dates, and money transfers under shell companies, all of them tied directly to Whitaker Lane and Victor Talbot. Ethan turned to me, his expression grave. "Claire, everything we found in your basement, the documents, the purchase records, the photo, every piece leads back to Yates. He is the reason my sister disappeared. He is the one who buried the evidence Talbot and the others helped hide." I stepped back, a chill slipping up my spine. Until this moment, I was simply an architect restoring old homes, and suddenly I was standing inside the center of a 10-year web of corruption, danger, and violence. Ethan opened an old photograph. The flashlight gleamed off Harrison Yates's face, an older man around Ethan's age, with salt and pepper hair, a calm expression, and eyes that were sharp enough to cut. And instantly, I understood why Ethan had called him the true power behind everything. He placed the photo on the table and told me Yates had stayed hidden in the shadows for years, and that finding him would be incredibly difficult, but with the evidence we had, and my help, we had a real chance to break the network apart. I sat still, trembling with both fear and pressure. Ethan placed a hand on my shoulder, his voice low but reassuring. "Claire, I know this is overwhelming. But you're the only person living in that house. You're the only one who can confirm the authenticity and placement of those documents. You're essential to making sure we get this right." I drew in a deep breath, trying to hold myself steady under the weight of everything. There was no turning back now. Julian continued outlining the details: shell companies, hidden real estate transitions, silent money trails, all aligning perfectly with what we had found in my home. Each detail suddenly felt alive and dangerous. I looked at Ethan, saw both severity and trust in his eyes, and understood that from this moment forward I was no longer just an ordinary architect. I had become an indispensable part of the hunt for Harrison Yates, the man behind the darkest secret of Whitaker Lane and the disappearance of Sadie Varela. I swallowed hard, my heart still racing, but my eyes had settled into a steady, unflinching resolve. I would continue no matter how afraid I was, because the truth had to be found, and I could no longer turn back. In the days after Harrison Yates's identity came to light, I began to realize that the house I once considered a place of safety was no longer a refuge. Each morning when I stepped outside, I noticed cars parked along the street, sometimes 2, sometimes 3, just sitting there with darkened windows, unmoving, as if quietly studying every movement I made. I couldn't tell whether it was coincidence or a warning, but my instincts whispered that someone was watching me. Ethan called multiple times, his voice stern, reminding me to stay alert, not to go anywhere alone, not to disclose information to anyone. The pressure settled over me like a weight, and every distant gaze, every shadow seemed to follow my steps, stirring my heartbeat into a frantic rhythm and filling every corner of the house with unease. Each time I opened the window for a breath of morning air, I noticed figures passing along the street. Cars looping around more than once, stopping just far enough away to observe without approaching. My phone received strange calls when I picked up. There was nothing but a long exhale before the line went dead, sending a cold ripple down my back. Ethan warned me not to be complacent, telling me that Harrison Yates and those connected to him were more than capable of identifying who posed a threat to them, and right now, I was a critical link. The quiet of the house, once comforting, became a burden. Every creak of the floor, every whistle of wind at the window, every sound outside felt like a possible threat. One afternoon, while I was working in my home office, I looked outside and saw a black SUV circling the block for the third time. I shut the window immediately and pulled the curtains closed, my heart pounding so hard it felt like it might tear through my ribs. Ethan called right after, his voice heavy and urgent, telling me not to leave the house until he and Cormac, his head of security, arrived. I felt fear spread inside me, but I also felt a strange sense of protection whenever Ethan's voice steadied my breath, a mix of tension and fragile safety wrapped together. At night, when the streetlights cast long shadows across the floorboards, I heard noises drifting from the alley nearby, footsteps, whispers, and no matter how hard I tried to calm myself, sleep slipped further away. Ethan insisted on keeping everything controlled. Cormac would stand guard. He and his team would monitor every entry point, but the fear still crept into my bones. I began to look at my house differently, seeing danger in every wall, every hallway, every level. Every ring of the doorbell made my chest tighten. Living on Whitaker Lane was no longer about owning a beautiful home. It had become a responsibility, a place holding the truth I now carried and the evidence only I could authenticate. I started documenting every strange movement around the house, each unfamiliar car, every odd phone call, every shadowy figure on the street, turning fear into a sort of vigilance, as though preparing myself for a battle I had never imagined being part of. I no longer opened windows at night. I never went outside alone. Every step was cautious, every sound recorded in my mind. Everything made me realize that since the moment I stepped into Ethan's story, since discovering those documents in the basement, my beloved home was no longer an ordinary refuge. It was the center of a dangerous network built by Harrison Yates and those connected to him, and I couldn't run, couldn't retreat. The only choice left was to live with constant vigilance, becoming an indispensable part of a rapidly unfolding investigation. One early morning, Ethan took me to Sadie Varella's small art gallery, where her paintings and sculptures were still preserved with care, standing as silent witnesses to a past buried too long. The space was full of natural light, yet I felt a heaviness in the air, as if every painting held a memory she had never had the chance to speak aloud. Ethan stood beside me in silence, his eyes tracing each brushstroke, as though reading a story I could only sense. I walked slowly from one piece to another, my chest tightening as I noticed Sadie's use of color, deep hues, tinged with unexpected sparks of light. Shadows woven into brightness, as if she were trying to capture secrets she couldn't voice. One painting depicted a sweeping view of Boston from above, the rooftops slanted, the arched windows distinct. And at once, I recognized Whitaker Lane, my street, my home. Ethan ran his fingers along the frame, his brow furrowing, saying that there was something Sadie must have seen, something she had painted, something that might hold a clue to what happened the day she disappeared. I touched the cold edge of the frame, feeling a shiver climb through me, realizing that these paintings were not simply art, they were visual diaries, the way Sadie preserved truth in strokes of color. Ethan walked to the back of the room and uncovered a portrait that had been stored in the archives for years, one he confessed he had never found the strength to examine closely until now. It depicted a man with a chiseled face and eyes so deep and sharp they seemed to cut through the canvas. "Claire," he said, "this is Harrison Yates." I think Sadie saw him maybe on the last day she was at Whitaker Lane, and she captured his image from memory. I froze, my pulse racing, because I was staring at the indirect evidence of the man behind everything. Ethan moved to another painting, a room with a desk, papers scattered, light falling across the floor, and every detail mirrored what we had just uncovered in the basement of my home. A cold tremor rippled through me. It was impossible to ignore. Sadie had observed, remembered, and documented everything, and no one had ever noticed. Ethan's voice lowered, firm but edged with awe. Claire, her artwork is the most important clue we have beyond the documents, the transactions, and the photographs. It shows us what the papers can't: spaces, angles, movements, even the tensions of the people involved. I stepped closer, studying each detail, trying to decipher the symbols Sadie had left behind. Shapes, colors, light, shadow, everything seemed to form a secret language I needed to understand for Ethan's sake. One painting showed a long hallway, darkness swallowing both ends with a faint glow in the center. Ethan believed it depicted the passage leading to where the most critical documents had been hidden by Talbot and Yates. I knelt to examine the painting, searching for the exact angle, the precise space, the detail Sadie might have witnessed. Every brushstroke felt intentional, as if she had left clues woven into the very texture of the paint. Pressure tightened inside me, but so did a strange sense of purpose, as if Sadie herself were guiding us through the labyrinth she never escaped. Ethan stood close, his voice steady but warm. Claire, I need you to keep observing, keep taking notes. Every detail, no matter how small, could lead us to Harrison Yates and the truth of what happened to Sadie. I inhaled deeply, my hand trembling as I touched the edge of each painting, recognizing that the responsibility placed on me was heavy. But I could no longer turn away. Each painting, each stroke, each shift of light became evidence the silent voice Sadie had left behind, and I understood that if decoded correctly, they could expose the entire network of power, motive, and secrets. I took notes, sketched diagrams of angles, lighting, and symbols, aligning them with what Ethan and his team had discovered. Slowly, each clue began threading itself into a larger tapestry. Fear, tension, anticipation, and curiosity twisted inside me. But I also knew this was the most crucial step in uncovering Harrison Yates, lifting the veil from the truth Sadie never had the chance to speak, and I was ready to continue, no matter how terrifying the path ahead. The gallery felt unusually quiet that afternoon, the soft light spilling through the tall windows and casting shifting patterns of brightness and shadow across Sadie's canvases, making every detail seem to stir beneath my gaze. Ethan led me slowly past her work, his eyes locked on each painting as though he were holding a silent conversation with the sister he had lost, reading her brushstrokes the way someone reads an unfinished letter. Then he stopped before a piece I hadn't noticed before, a large canvas depicting a small room where light fell through a window onto an old wooden floor, illuminating scattered papers and carefully placed objects. And in the far corner, half hidden, a shadowed figure stood looking toward the window as if observing something beyond it. Ethan leaned closer, his voice low but steady as he said, "Claire, this is a painting that speaks." Sadie saw something we need, and she recorded it with a precision so subtle no one else ever noticed. I lowered myself onto a nearby stool, my pulse quickening as I studied the painting. The light, the darkness, the placement of every object, the angle of the shadowed figure's gaze. Everything seemed to hold information that no document or file could capture. Ethan pointed toward a corner of the canvas where a desk lay strewn with papers, explaining that this might have been where Victor Talbot once kept certain key documents before they were moved into the basement of my home, and that the shadowed figure was likely Harrison Yates caught in a fleeting moment Sadie had witnessed. A shiver ran through me as I realized every brush stroke, every pocket of light and shadow could be a clue. an accidental map Sadie had left behind for us. Ethan leaned closer to me, his eyes serious but full of faith. "Claire, you need to study every detail and take careful notes. Anything you see here could confirm or expand on what we found in your house and in the files." I lowered my head and wrote, my hand trembling, my heart tightening with both fear and anticipation, every passing second reminding me of the weight of responsibility pressing onto my shoulders. I stepped nearer to the painting, focusing on the figure at the back of the room, imagining the movement of his body, the way he stood, the things Sadie might have seen. If we decoded this correctly, we could pinpoint where those documents had been kept, perhaps even trace the movements of Harrison Yates and Victor Talbot through the house. Ethan stepped beside me, placing a steady hand on my shoulder, his voice low. "Claire, I know this is overwhelming, but this painting, this one, it's the key that ties every clue together. And you're the only one who can read the message Sadie left behind." I swallowed hard, my nerves electric, but beneath the fear, a sense of resolve began to rise. Every detail, every brush stroke was no longer just art, they were signals, guides through a hidden world, a bridge between the past and the present, between Sadie and us. I took a breath, kept writing, my eyes fixed on the painting, understanding that I had to get this right, that any detail left unnoticed could cost us the one thread leading to Harrison Yates. Ethan stayed at my side, his gaze fixed on me, protective, unwavering, and in that moment I understood that everything I did in this gallery, every note I made from this painting that spoke, would shape the direction of the investigation, would shape whether Harrison Yates was ever exposed, whether the truth about Sadie Varela would ever reach the light. And I was ready, though, my heart hammered, to keep going down this dangerous but necessary path. We had barely stepped outside the gallery, the fading daylight mixing with pockets of shadow along the street, when a cold shiver slid down my spine. Ethan glanced over his shoulder, his brow tightening, his voice a low warning. "Claire, stay calm, but be ready for anything." I didn't even have time to ask before hurried footsteps exploded behind us. 3 figures rushed toward us, their movements sharp and deliberate, men who were clearly not innocent bystanders. Ethan grabbed my hand and pulled me toward a narrow alley, his body shielding mine, each of his steps syncing with the panic hammering in my chest. The slap of shoes on concrete, the harsh breaths of our pursuers, and the clang of a loose metal gate nearby mingled with the smell of smoke from a trash can fire, creating a frantic, unforgettable chaos. I tried to concentrate, but my heartbeat roared in my ears. Each step sent shocks up my legs. Every doorway, every side street seemed like a possible escape, or a trap. Ethan guided me through a path I didn't know existed, his eyes never leaving the threat behind us, his whole body taut with controlled force. We darted through back alleys, pivoting sharply, climbing a narrow set of stairs, my breath stuttering as I fought to match Ethan's pace, realizing that every step was a fight to survive. Shouts behind us told me the men had spotted our direction. Ethan grabbed his phone, his voice clipped. "We need backup now." He cut through a passageway into an abandoned parking lot. The place was littered with old cars and deep shadows cast by nearby buildings, and Ethan pressed me against the far side of a large truck, his body blocking mine as we held our breath. Footsteps echoed closer. Sweat blurred my vision. Adrenaline sharpened every sound. Seconds stretched into something unbearable before Ethan silently signaled for us to move. He pulled me along to a back exit of the lot, where a dark sedan idled, hidden from the street. I scrambled into the back seat, my pulse wild, staring through the window at the silhouettes sprinting past, unaware of us by just seconds. Ethan floored the gas, weaving through side streets, staying in dim corridors between buildings. The engine growled, my fingers dug into the seat, and the scent of smoke and far-off traffic mingled with the frantic rhythm in my chest. Once, we paused in a shadowed alley, and Ethan checked every angle before driving again. His voice stayed steady even though urgency pulsed beneath it. "These men won't quit easily. We need to reach the safe house." My breaths came shallow as I tried to steady myself, but my heart wouldn't slow. The safety we had now felt, fragile, temporary. Ethan remained calm and focused, steering through darkened streets, avoiding lit intersections and cameras, every turn executed with the precision of someone who had anticipated this long ago. His eyes repeatedly checked the mirrors, alert to every flicker of movement. I couldn't look away, caught in a storm of fear and adrenaline, but also aware of the strength in the way Ethan shielded me, the certainty in his presence. Finally, the car pulled up to a discreet house tucked away in an isolated corner of the neighborhood. Ethan stepped out, opened my door, and kept his hand on me as he guided me inside. His eyes met mine, grave but reassuring. "We're safe for now. But Claire, listen carefully. From this moment on, you must stay alert. Harrison Yates and the people around him won't stop. And we're only at the beginning of the fight to bring the truth into the open." I exhaled shakily, feeling both exhaustion and relief wash through me. From the moment I stepped out of that gallery, the ordinary rhythm of my life had vanished, and I knew there was no returning to what I once considered normal. I would have to keep going with Ethan through danger, through clues, through every secret Sadie had left behind, until the truth was no longer buried. The moment we stepped into the secluded house Cormac had prepared, the door clamped shut behind us, and although every muscle in my body loosened as if released from an invisible grip, my heart was still racing. Ethan closed the door and swept his gaze across the room, scanning every corner, every exit, before reminding me that from this moment on, this place was our temporary shelter, safer than the watchful eyes that had trailed us through the streets. I sank into a chair, my hands still trembling, fear and relief mixing into something sharp and unsteady, realizing that everything we had just escaped from had shattered whatever normal rhythm my life once had. Ethan paced the room, his voice low but firm as he said, "Claire, now we begin planning our counterattack. We have to find Harrison Yates and everyone tied to him. We need to decode the entire network Sadie accidentally left behind." I drew a long breath, feeling the weight of the responsibility pressing in on me, yet knowing I couldn't walk away from it. Ethan opened his laptop, laying out a diagram of connections, suspicious transactions, locations, and the files we had just gathered, weaving them together with the clues from Sadie's painting, outlining every step required to pinpoint the man they called the architect and the other crucial details buried under layers of deception. I took careful notes, my hands trembling but my mind focused, aware that every detail, every signature in the files, every photograph, every symbol hidden in Sadie's brushstrokes was a link in the chain leading us toward Harrison Yates. Cormac stood behind us, silent but vigilant, his presence a reminder that danger was always close, even here, making the safety of this place feel solid yet precariously temporary. Ethan explained that we would need to comb through all the records again, cross-check data, and prepare protective measures before making any move, each step calculated to avoid walking into one of Yates's traps. I bowed my head over my notes, letting my fear shift into a sharper, more purposeful kind of alertness, constructing the early shape of our counterattack in my mind. We divided the work. Ethan would oversee everything, Julian would review all related files, Tomas would contact informants and track earlier transactions, and I would verify every detail in my house and in Sadie's painting, recording everything with absolute accuracy for the next phase. I realized, right then, that I was no longer an outsider watching from the edges. Every action I took, every observation I made now shaped the path of this investigation. Ethan turned toward me, his expression stern yet full of trust. Claire, I know this is overwhelming, but I need you here. Anything you see could help us pinpoint Yates and bring the truth to light. I nodded, my hands shaking but my resolve firming, understanding that the safety of these walls was only a brief pause. There was so much left to do, and we needed to move like a single unit, precise, alert, and relentless to protect the evidence and ourselves. Fear, pressure, adrenaline, determination, they tangled tightly inside me as I sat at the table, opened my notebook, and prepared to record every plan, every observation. At that moment, I fully stepped into the war against Harrison Yates, with no path left except forward, using every clue, every detail, every quiet ounce of strength I had to fight back and bring the truth into the light. The next morning, Ethan informed me that we would meet with federal prosecutor Catherine Reyes to prepare the case. Dawn filtered through the window of our safe house, sharpening every detail in the room, the margin notes in my journal, the meticulously sorted files Ethan and Julian had assembled. When Reyes arrived, she carried an air of stern professionalism, her gaze sweeping across the documents before settling on me. "Claire," she said, "I've heard from Ethan about your findings, the documents discovered in your basement, the paintings Sadie left behind, and now I need every detail verified from the original source, from the owner of the house herself." I sat down, my heartbeat quickening, the pressure unmistakable, yet carrying a strange undercurrent of resolve, because I now understood that my role was no longer passive. I was a living thread in the chain of evidence, and every word I spoke mattered. Ethan stood nearby, watching me, his voice steady as he reminded me. "Claire, remember every detail. Whatever Ms. Reyes asks, answer precisely." We opened the files page after page, photograph after photograph, every note from the earlier investigation that Julian and Tomas had compiled. I read aloud, confirming dates, names, locations, and the connections to Victor Talbot, Harrison Yates, the shell companies, and the labyrinth of real estate transactions. Reyes questioned me about the process of purchasing Whitaker Lane, each step of the auction, my calls with the broker, Jennifer Park, the competing bidders, the closing timeline, every legal document I remembered signing. I answered with care, aware that each word carried weight, every recollection potentially a crucial piece in exposing Harrison Yates. Ethan added observations, pointing out details I might have overlooked, hints woven into Sadie's painting, locations Talbot used to hide documents, behaviors that revealed how Yates maintained control over his criminal network. Reyes flipped through each page, asking specifically about how the documents were found, their condition, everything I had seen and verified. The pressure built steadily, my hands slightly trembling as I wrote and confirmed details. Yet the more questions she asked, the more I understood the importance of precision. A single error could give Yates the crack he needed to destroy evidence or tighten the noose around us. Ethan watched, quiet but focused, occasionally reminding me to stay anchored in the specifics, to remember that every piece from Whitaker Lane, every clue from the painting, every page of every file was part of the chain the prosecutor needed to build her case. I recorded everything, emphasizing the smallest details, the placement of each painting, the notations in the margins, the details in the photographs I had reviewed with Ethan. I could feel the truth gathering weight as our notes grew, realizing that the strength of our case lay in the unity and precision of every detail. Reyes evaluated each answer carefully, asking me to repeat certain details, verifying my account word for word. My pulse hammered, but I understood that this was necessary. This was the path toward ensuring Yates had nowhere to hide. When the meeting finally ended, Ethan placed a steady hand on my shoulder, his eyes both serious and quietly reassuring. "Claire, you've become an essential link in protecting the chain of evidence. Everything you confirm today brings the prosecutor closer to breaking the network and revealing the truth about Sadie Varela. I drew in a long breath, feeling the pressure linger but mingled now with a fragile, growing confidence. From here on, every step we took had direction, structure, purpose, and I was no longer standing on the outside looking in. I was part of the fight for truth, safety, and justice. The next day, I was taken to the office of Federal Prosecutor Catherine Reyes to give my official statement, and with each step down the hallway, I felt my heartbeat thrumming harder than usual, each closing door behind me pressing the weight of responsibility deeper onto my shoulders. I sat across from Reyes and Ethan while Julian stood nearby with a thick stack of files, the room heavy with expectant silence, broken only by the soft scratch of a pen as I signed the witness verification forms. Reyes met my eyes, her voice low but steady as she said, "Claire, you need to recount the entire process of discovering the documents in the basement of Whitaker Lane from the moment you noticed the slip of paper with the address to Sadie's painting. Every detail must be precise and consistent." I drew a long breath, steadied myself, and began describing everything that had happened, each step I took into the house, every movement, the way I examined the paintings, every small clue Ethan and his team uncovered. Reyes's attention unwavering as her pen moved steadily across the page. I spoke of the auction process, the calls with the broker, the legal paperwork and contracts. Every detail I could remember. The fear and tension when shadows began following me around the house, with Ethan stepping in to confirm or expand on what I recalled. I described the painting Sadie left the lighting, the placement of objects, the shape of the figure in the corner, and how it connected to the documents we found, emphasizing that I had witnessed and noted every detail myself to keep the chain of evidence intact. Reyes repeated several questions, sometimes asking me to describe what I saw as if with my naked eyes again, and I tried to recall everything. The colors, the direction of the light, the placement of objects. The moment I realized the figure in the painting was Harrison Yates. Ethan clarified the parts I hadn't fully understood at first: real estate transactions, shell companies, and the connections between Talbot and Yates, helping me present a full and consistent account. When I reached the part about finding the files, photographs, and notebooks hidden inside the basement walls, I felt the tension in the room tighten, but I also understood the significance of my role. Every answer was a crucial link in building the case against Harrison Yates and his associates. Reyes asked about witnesses and supporting details, and I listed Julian, Tomas, Ethan, along with the detailed notes I had kept, ensuring every piece of evidence was documented and corroborated. The pressure was immense, but within it I felt a growing sense of responsibility, realizing that I was helping bring Yates into the light, protecting the truth about Sadie Varela, and that every detail I provided would anchor the case and guide the prosecutor's next steps. After hours of questioning, the statement concluded. I signed once more, my heart still pounding, but the heaviness began to lift. I looked at Ethan, and he gave me a small, steadying smile, his eyes both reassuring and firm. "Claire," he said, "you did well. What you've given today will help seal this case, and now we're one step closer to bringing Harrison Yates to justice." I exhaled, realizing that the preparation and testimony had placed me squarely at the center of the investigation, and from here on, my focus and efforts could determine the outcome of the entire case. I knew I couldn't retreat. I had to continue alongside Ethan and his team to bring the truth forward with precision and courage. That morning, when the sound of police sirens echoed through the street, I knew we were entering the decisive phase. Ethan pulled me from the room, his voice calm but firm as he said, "Claire, it's time to witness the result of everything we've worked for." I looked through the window and saw federal agents and local police locking down the entire block, patrol cars lined across the street, the flashing lights glinting off the pavement still slick from last night's rain. A strange mixture of relief and rising anticipation stirred inside me. The door of Whitaker Lane closed behind us as I stepped out, holding the sealed evidence bag, each footstep heavy, my heartbeat quick but steady under the watch of Ethan's team surrounding me like a moving shield. Ethan leaned closer, his voice low. "Claire, stay calm. Everything has been prepared. Yates won't slip away." I saw Harrison Yates being escorted out, his expression cold, but no longer carrying the same suffocating authority it once held. His vehicle was flanked by heavily armed officers as they led him away, and a weight I had carried for weeks seemed to loosen in my chest. Cormac stood near me, his gaze sharp and alert, but my breathing grew steadier as I realized that, from this moment on, Whitaker Lane was no longer a place where I needed to flinch at every creak or shadow. Ethan stepped up beside me, resting a firm hand on my shoulder. "Claire," he said, "this house won't haunt you anymore. We've eliminated the immediate threat from Yates. But I still need you with us as we verify the remaining details to secure the evidence." I took a long breath, the suffocating tension of the past days giving way to a slow, fragile sense of relief, though the memories of the fear, the footsteps, the scraps of paper, and Sadie's painting still clung to me. I looked around the property. Every wall, every hallway, every piece of furniture washed clean of danger but still heavy with memory. Ethan told me gently that we would leave now, that I would be taken somewhere safe, somewhere I could begin again. This house was evidence now no longer a home. I nodded, my legs slightly unsteady as I climbed into the car with Ethan. I looked back at the house one last time through the window, realizing I was no longer an outsider. Every step, every decision, every observation I had made had shaped the road to justice. Cormac sat in the back, scanning the surroundings, while Ethan drove slowly through the familiar streets that looked different now, no longer threatening, yet still bearing the imprints of everything that had happened. I closed my eyes briefly, weary but relieved, sensing that Whitaker Lane, the haunted house I once called home, was now only a memory, a place I could finally leave behind, taking with me the lessons, the clues, and the recognition that I had fought, that I had helped bring the truth into daylight. My life, from this moment, was beginning again lighter, but forever shaped by what had happened. After all the long days of tension and danger, I stepped into my new home, a bright, spacious place filled with natural light and untouched by the shadows of the past. Ethan stood beside me, his expression gentle yet grounded. Together, we walked through each room, arranging belongings, feeling the quiet warmth of a home no longer burdened by secrets or threats. One small corner had been set aside as a memorial for Sadie Varela, her portrait and sketches displayed with care, a testament to her talent, her life, and the light she had left behind. I stood before the artwork, my heart carrying both sorrow and release, knowing that the truth had finally surfaced. Justice had been served. Harrison Yates and his accomplices were finally being held accountable for their cruelty. Ethan gently took my hand. We drew a steady breath together, letting the peace settle around us, understanding that even in a world full of danger and injustice, resilience, honesty, and the determination to protect the truth could guide us out of the darkest places. In that moment, I felt the deeper lesson of humanity, the courage to stand for what is right, the strength found in connection, and how the brave actions of a single person could change the lives of many. As we sat beside Sadie's painting in the late afternoon light pouring through the window, Ethan and I looked at each other with an understanding that everything could begin anew. Even from pain and loss, we had found hope, peace, and a new light. And that brings us to the end of Claire and Ethan's journey. This story was not just about a case or hidden secrets, but about cherishing life, preserving the memory of those we've lost, and learning to live fully and bravely in the present. If this story touched you, please take a moment to subscribe to our channel, like, and share so you can join us for more meaningful stories every day. Tell us in the comments how this journey made you feel, whether it echoes something in your own life, your own struggles, or your own healing. We truly want to hear the honest truths from your hearts. We wish everyone watching this video good health, joyful days, and a peaceful heart. Treasure your families, your friends, and the precious moments of your life. Be brave, be kind, and love more deeply. Thank you for watching, and we hope to see you in the next video, where we will continue sharing heartfelt stories full of emotion and humanity. Goodbye, and may your next day be filled with strength, joy, and quiet peace.